Okay, I'd like to get started. I show 3:30 on my smartphone. Happy New Year, everybody. I'll bring to order the Community Corrections Partnership. The regular meeting, scheduled for January 9th. I would like to start with roll call. On my far right, if you'll state your name and your agency.
Pamela Patterson, DA's Office, Victims Unit.
Good afternoon, Manny Gonzalez, Office of the CAO.
Bob Masterson, King City Police, representing Maclea.
Mike Moore, Undersheriff, Monterey County, representing Steve Bernal, Sheriff.
Marsha Parsons, Chief Probation Officer, representing the Probation Department.
Cynthia Hassan, Deputy County Counsel.
Elliot Robinson, Director Social Services, Social Services.
Dean Flippo, District Attorney, representing the District Attorney's Office.
Susan Chapman, Monterey County Public Defender.
Amy Miller, Monterey County Behavioral Health.
Yvette Irving, representing Monterey County Office of Education.
Thank you. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
Let the record reflect there were no additions or corrections to the agenda.
Thank you. Before we start, I would like to introduce Susan Chapman, the new Monterey County Public Defender, and Robert Masterson, the relatively new Chief of the King City Police Department. We would like to welcome them to our CCP board. I'll take public comment on any item that is not on the agenda.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I don't have no issue, no arrows to throw today. I just want to wish you guys a happy new year. Hopefully we have a positive and productive year and we're able to work with each other. My name is Israel and I work with Milpa Salinas. Thank you.
Thank you, Israel. Same to you and to Milpa. We have some minutes to approve. We have the minutes of November 14th, 2016. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second. I can't, sorry.
Thank you. Any comments or corrections to those minutes? Seeing none? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Then we have the special meeting minutes of November 29th. I will move to approve. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any corrections, discussion about those minutes? Seeing none? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Thank you. We also have a change in our 2017 meeting schedule. We had originally scheduled a meeting for December 4th. Correct me if I'm wrong. Well, we had to change that because the chambers were being used by somebody else. So we want to continue. We want to put that meeting over to December 11th. So I need a new motion to approve the new meeting schedule for the CCP for 2017.
So moved.
Second? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Thank you. Our first presentation is the AB 109 Criminal Justice Realignment Service Delivery presentation, and I'll ask Management Analyst 3, Robin Rodriguez, to give that presentation.
Good afternoon. The report is actually under tab 7 in your binder. So this report is replacing the quarterly statistical section of the service providers data that we've included in the past in our quarterly reports. And this is our first attempt to pull the data that we have been entering into efforts to outcomes out and to try to look at outcomes and completion rates and things like that. If you have questions, feedback, or comments, Those are things that we can take into account next year when we also produce this report for next year. This serves as the template and the things that we plan to report on in the future. I would hope to see some enhancement next year in terms of other outcome measures being reported on, but this was our first start. I would highlight that when we talk about active enrollments during the fiscal year, we're really talking about the number of people that were served during the fiscal year. So people who, for instance, may have been referred prior to the fiscal year, but they got served within the fiscal year. That also includes people who got referred during the fiscal year and they're still active and open even now. When we talk about the completions, and I've given you some statistics on overall program completion, take into account that our programs are voluntary and people have the right to choose and participate in the services that they're referred to. So primarily a client who is referred for employment, for instance, it's based on the fact that they're expressing to their officer that they need help finding a job. And sometimes they're able to find a job before the service actually starts, or sometimes they change their mind, or they decide that they don't want that service. So the completion rates take that into account, that not everyone is going to receive services or wants to receive services. And that's why you see quite a bit of variation on that. And I've got some definitions in the back of the report to further explain the different things that we counted.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from the board on the service delivery report? Seeing none, is there any public comment on the service delivery report?
Good afternoon, and wishing you all a Happy New Year also. Elliot Rockowitz Roberts with the American Civil Liberties Union. And I really think these new figures are incredible. They really give a sense of what's actually happening in the programs. But now I was wondering if you could take it one step further, because you look, for example, at the overall program completion rate for Kickstart, and it's 19%. Now, I look at that and I think that looks pretty awful. And so is there any way to refine the figures so we know, well, how successful really is the program, and is it just by the number of people who completed it? I think Robin suggested already that there are other ways people get services, but certainly if you just look at the completion rate, it seems to suggest the program isn't successful. I mean, 24% is not a high completion rate. So if there's any way to fine-tune these so we get a better sense of actually how successful the programs are, I think that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further public comment? Oh, this is going to be a quick meeting. Our last presentation is our budget workshop presentation. We've been working, trying to get a clear understanding of the budget process and what we're looking at doing in 2017-18. Yes. And this will be the last presentation on the budget. We will be voting on our budget in February. So I will call Nancy Hatton, our Adult Division Director, to give the presentation.
Good afternoon, Happy New Year. So, I think as most of you are painfully aware, we have provided you recently with a lot of data to build up to today's meeting. Dawn has provided you with budget projections. We've done a program overview that we titled Spotlight. We created budget and performance data, Robin's service delivery report that you just saw, and this presentation itself is actually under tab 8. I think it's the very next one in the binder that you have. So we also tried to collect the documents that we've been giving to you over the last few meetings that are specifically related to building the framework around building a budget, and put those documents all in the binder for you to try to help keep everything together. So this is the budget workshop. We are now on the last phase of all of the data and information that we've been building up to. The budget workshop has 3 goals. Number 1, to allocate resources based on a tiered priority system. And this was a system that we developed after we went out, did some homework, reached out to some other counties, as you all had suggested, to see how are other counties building their AB 109 budget. What does their framework look like? So we did that, we did some homework, and we ended up adopting this tiered system from Sonoma County. Number 2, to identify potential areas or areas of need or gaps in services. And number 3, ultimately to provide recommendations to the Board of Supervisors for this AB 109 public safety realignment money as part of the county's regular budget process. So, priorities. Why a tier system? It allows us to identify priorities based on legislative mandates. That's kind of the basic, most fundamental area, and these are the areas that the counties are now responsible for as a result of realignment. The 2 biggest examples of that are incarceration. Housing offenders that previously used to be housed in state prison are now pushed down to the county level, and we provide that housing and all the services that come along with it. And the supervision of offenders upon release from serving their prison sentence, whether it's in state prison and coming out as a PRCS offender, or whether it's a local state prison sentence and coming out as a mandatory supervision offender. That tail of supervision is now the responsibility of the local probation department. It establishes criteria and structure for funding. It supports efficient service delivery and assists in the selection of services and allows for long-term planning. So again, the idea of the budget workshop and all of the build-up to this has been to make sure that you have all the information that you need to make the decisions regarding the budget, but it's also to try and develop a framework that we can use for all of our future budgets. So we have a 3-tiered system. Tier 1 are critical programs and services, and these are services that must be funded in order to meet legislative mandates and for the county to address some basic needs of custody supervision and evidence-based treatment for realigned offenders. And it's the highest priority for funding. Tier 2 are beneficial programs, and these are programs that clearly help Monterey County's criminal justice system as a whole, but may not be directly related or impact to AB 109 offenders, and it would receive funding if available as the second priority. Tier 3 are ancillary programs, and these are programs that provide ancillary benefits to criminal justice in Monterey County, and these would be the first candidates for reduction or elimination in case of funding shortfalls. Critical programs and services are Tier 1. Why are they critical? Because they support services and activities related to the custody and supervision of offenders, including alternatives to incarceration, and services that address the basic needs of the mentally ill and homeless offenders. Now, the mentally ill and homeless offenders, I had identified as Tier 1 because if we don't meet the basic needs of these individuals, then we can't really provide that next level or any kind of rehabilitation treatment, basically. So it's meeting the basic needs. Tier 2 are the beneficial programs and services, and these are support services and activities that address the needs of the offender population in rehabilitation and future crime reduction. These services include short-term reentry, employment, services, and victim services, among others. Tier 3 are the ancillary programs and services, and these are the services that enhance the criminal justice system as a whole. considering criteria for funding Tier 2 and Tier 3, you could consider looking at evidence-based programming, data and outcome-driven, for instance, the number of clients that are served by any given service or program, any positive impact found in that program. Is it consistent with public safety realignment and post-release community supervision plan of 2011 for the County of Monterey? Does it reduce the use of jail beds? And is it targeted to high-risk offenders? So these are just some items for consideration when you're evaluating Tier 2 or Tier 3 level programs. So the devil is in the details, as we all know. What I did is I took the last budget document that you received from Dawn at our last CCP meeting, and I modified that document to apply the tiers as they were defined to those programs and services. What you'll see is that because we've always had a lot of constraints fiscally, and we've had to start from the top and providing the most critical services, number one, we currently aren't providing any services that would be defined as ancillary services using this tier system. And number two, most of our services that we currently provide are rated as Tier 1, so they are critical. Now, if anybody has any questions on these first few slides, I'm going to pass it over to Dawn, our finance manager. But does anyone have any questions that are just related to this tier system?
Any questions? Okay. Done? Thank you, Nancy.
Good afternoon. So as we look forward to the next couple meetings with the CCP at the Public Safety Realignment Budget, just wanted to bring to your attention that the annual allocation is remaining at $12.4 million. Currently, that is unchanged from the last documentation that was updated from the state and various sources. We're hoping to possibly get an update after the governor's release of the January forecasted budget, and then, of course, they may revise. But for now, we're going with the $12.4 million. The projected baseline for 17-18 that was provided to you at previous meetings is around $13.1 million, and that includes the realignment of expenditures with a net zero effect with different county departments. The reserve policy that you all put in place at the last meeting is currently set at $1.8 million, which is derived from the fund balance that was available at the end of fiscal year 15-16, which was around $7.2 million. And you take 15% of that, and so our reserve is now at 1.8. The net fund balance after that is 5.4 million. So some deadlines that are coming up include the need for county departments to put together their baseline budgets like we do every year. And those, along with any reallocations that you're considering, should be submitted back to Probation Finance by January 20th. We're going to send out instructions and the forms that we use for those to the department heads and your finance managers this week. Additionally, there's some augmentation requests, forms that will be sent out as well at that point in time, and those are due back to probation by January 27th. And this will allow us to compile all that information for enough time for the February 13th meeting and meet the county's budget deadline, which is submission of all data countywide by March 7th. So decisions for the next meetings include the following items. Adopt the tier system and assign tiers to funded services. Approve the baseline budget. Approve county departments' augmentations and or reallocations of funding for fiscal year 17-18. And at this point in time, we're hoping to achieve that at the February 13th meeting.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments at this time for Dawn. I think it's pretty clear what we need to consider between now and the next meeting. Next meeting, we need to be able to discuss the pros and cons of the tier system, and if we need any changes in that tier system as outlined previously. And then we need to start working on agreeing on the budget. Are there any questions? Yes, Dean?
Through the chair, I'm curious about the process in terms of determining what tiers would be assigned to the various funded services. Is there has been the discussion of a process that we would follow? Is there going to be a recommendation? Is it going to be all open with the voting members actually stating where they feel that should be?
That was a discussion that this board needs to have and decide on the tier system. We gave a recommendation. It doesn't mean things can't be moved around.
Just a technical question. Don, when you say includes realignment of expenditures with net zero effect?
So reallocation is if you have a little bit of savings in one program and you want to apply it to something that has some cost escalators in another area that you're already funded for, it's just reallocating those dollars, and there's a form that will go for that.
Okay,
As
so
part of the-
within, so if there's, say, Turning Point has both housing and employment, if they can have some level of realignment between those two programs?
Well, let's be
Stephanie?
specific to the fact that there's a county department that contracts with that entity for those services. So the county department must first decide that that's where they want that funding to be focused on.
Okay.
So that has to happen first. And then, depending on how the form is filled out and what the CCP decides, that would either be updated and approved or not.
Okay, so it'd be a recommendation that would come to the CCP, though?
That is correct.
Okay.
Did I answer your question? This would be, the current CCP approved budget utilizing the tier system would be our preliminary recommendation, but it's something that this board needs to decide on.
All right, I think I understand. Thank you.
Okay. Just one other question, just to make sure I understand. With the net fund balance of 5.4 million, that's what we discussed last time in terms of a threshold of one-time fund, a total amount of one-time funds that could be used for program given the existing financing. Am I understanding what?
Correct. So that 5.4 represents the fund balance that's left after the reserve is taken into consideration. And then additionally, with the prior spreadsheet that was provided at the last meeting, you'll notice that the budget for fiscal year 17-18 was projected to be around 13.1 million, but our annual funding is only coming in around 12.4 million. So we will be using amounts of the reserve to cover basic cost escalators, MOU increases, PERS increases, health insurance increases for the staffing that's provided.
So will we need a set of priorities then in terms of, first covering some, inflators around that reserve balance? Is it something else that we should be prepared to discuss?
It should be part of the discussion on the February 13th meeting.
Okay.
And I think that will be a little bit more clear once we get all the data from all the different county departments and put together, compile all the requests and see what it looks like.
Okay.
Any other questions for Dawn? Robin?
Madam Chair, I have a question for Nancy on the tier system. You had said that earlier that you use the tier system by Sonoma, so are these the same criteria that they use? Or how are these definitions for each tier, how are those generated?
I think that they are mostly the same. I think we might have made some changes to I believe that really the only change that I made to their original tier system was after they had used it for 1, perhaps 2 years, I'm not sure, going through their data, they identified mentally ill and homeless as a priority, And it wasn't, I didn't see it as initially included in their Tier 1 definition in their first year. But I recognize that we've had that learning curve as well without a tier system, and so I included it within our Tier 1. Other than that, I think it basically mirrors, as far as the definitions of the tier system, I think it basically mirrors their framework.
And by tier, you mean priority?
Yes. Yeah, that's the purpose of the tier system, is to prioritize funding.
All right, thank you.
Robin?
Sorry, Don, this question is for you. Just so that I'm clear.
Sure.
Any difference between the annual allocation and the projected baseline budget would potentially be made up by the reserve or the net fund balance?
Currently, the reserve is stated for use for emergency purposes,
Pulled off to the
unplanned.
side.
For regular cost escalators, most counties are tapping on the rolling fund balance.
Okay.
Any further comments or questions from the board? Is there any public comment on this presentation? All right, seeing none. Before we adjourn, the binders that we have prepared for the board, you can either take them with you and study them between now and February, but if you are not going to do that, I would suggest you leave them so that we don't get them misplaced. We'll pick them up and deliver them at the next meeting. But if you want to take the material with you to study it, feel free to do so. And we are adjourned. Thank you.
You're going to ease me into the dark.